Zhedan Zoye Chonam Lan Chanjo Pardon Dane Yabdo Daye Juje Yebe Zanam Jolam Benjira Sangye Jobo Shuo Sangye Zhedan Zoye Chonam Lan Chanjo Pardon Daye Juje Yebe Zanam Ye Jolam Benjira Sangye Now the mandala. Wow, je le ye chu ye me do ta ma de ra bin je de yan ba de san ye yin do ni de wa zhe wen nan da xian wa zhe ba ra shuo yi de ma bu ro la ma da la de me ya da ga ya ma san xie ra pa de ma ye mi ba ye mo ni so so zhang ye ye xie ju huan de zhong ye be yong ma cha zhe mo de ya ta ga de pa ra para sam de de so ha de ya ta ga de para sam de de so ha de ya ta ga de para sam de de so de ya ta ga de para sam de de so ha de ya ta ga de para sam de so ha真的具体，这个为是领导来点我们把他是人家当解决许多到位，或者包办那这，so there is a short prayer to Manjushu. By the loving rays of your supreme knowledge, clear out the darkness of my ignorance. In order to comprehend the sutras and the shastras, grant me the luminous pride of wisdom. Okay. Greetings to everyone. Greetings to everyone. So, as you remember, the topic of this session that we are going through for the last few weeks is dependent origination. In fact, the praise to Buddha Shakyamuni by Lama Tsongkapa called the praise to the dependent origination. So by praising the dependent origination, or the idea that the idea of the philosophy of dependent origination, which Buddha taught, this is actually by praising the deed of a person, you are praising the person. So this becomes a deed. So it becomes a praise indeed. So it is not just a flowery word. So therefore, the dependent origination, which was the way, which is the path that will lead us out of samsara. So therefore, Buddha, who himself has swimmed across the sea, swimmed across the ocean of samsara, not just samsara, but that of the non-enlightened state. Buddha Shakyamuni has swam across the ocean of non-enlightened state, and the key sort of the key to that, the key to the escape route for escaping samsara or escaping non-enlightenment lies within the realization of emptiness. So therefore, it was the key that Buddha himself used to free himself, and it is the key that he is passing on to us. And then when we become when we become enlightened, when we become the Buddhas, we pass that key to others who have not yet enlightened. And so therefore, the circulation of the keys to path of enlightenment continues. It keeps circling,
it keeps winding, it keeps circulating, and so it keeps winding, and so therefore the Dharma is sometimes represented by the wheel of the Dharma. So the wheel, the wheel, just as a wheel would be, just as a wheel would be circling or circulating round and round, those who have not yet enlightened are sowed the seed of enlightenment by those who have already enlightened, and that is, and thus those who have not yet enlightened becomes enlightened, and then when those who have not yet become enlightened gets enlightenment, will turn the wheel of Dharma, or in other words, pass out the keys, making other non-enlightened people, non-enlightened individuals enlightened as well. So the circulation or the circle keeps continuing, and so that's why the Buddha's teaching is represented by the wheel, and often referred to as the wheel of Dharma. Okay, so last week we have covered up to verse number 12. Verse number 12, which is so last week's teaching is up to verse number 12, and then so therefore, which reads, whereas one sees the opposite, since there can be no function in emptiness, nor emptiness in what has functions, one falls into the dreadful abyss you maintain. So did that one, that is a very profound verse, which actually succinctly entails the whole of Heart Sutra, and therefore the whole of the coreness, the wholeness of the Heart Sutra, and therefore the wholeness of all the what we call the wisdom related sutras, the Paramita Sutras, because at the end of the day, the Paramita Sutra is all about understanding the wisdom, and in order to get to the wisdom path, in order to get to the wisdom part, you have to tackle, or you have to deal with the other levels preceding the wisdom, which are a meditation level, meditation, perseverance, generosity, discipline, and so on and so forth. So therefore, as we covered last week, being empty and still being able to function. So that is the marvel. That is the marvelous discovery that Buddha made. So before Buddha came, the belief is that if something is empty, of having an inherent existence, if there is no self existence, then if something is not independent, if something is interdependent, if something is not independent, then that thing would not be able to function. In order to function, you need to have some room to wiggle. You need to have that independence to function. And if you do not have the independence, if you are not independent, if you are interdependent, that means you are not independent. And if you are not independent, then you do not have the independence to wiggle around. You do not have the independence to function. You do not have the independence to create. You do not have the independence to move around, to affect. So therefore, that is the belief. But Buddha when Buddha came into this world, when Siddhartha Gautama came into this world and eventually became the Buddha, he preached that such thing is possible. Actually, it is because things are empty, that things do not have an inherent existence, that things are not independent, that things are interdependent. Therefore, they themselves are dependent upon other causes to exist, and through them they will create other forces, other effects, other results, other consequences, which are dependent upon itself. Because of that, this arises. Because of this, those arises. So, so that is the that is the fundamental, the idea of interdependence. So nor emptiness. So if something is emptiness, if something is empty of having an inherent existence, then it cannot have any functions. It cannot have any valid functions. Or if something is functionable, then it cannot be empty. That ideology, that philosophy is refuted by the Buddha through the preaching of emptiness, through the preaching of interdependence, through the preaching of emptiness, based on interdependence. So now this actually follows the next line, which is, therefore in your teaching, seeing dependent origination is hailed, that too not as an utter non-existence, nor as an intrinsic existence. So in your teaching, meaning Buddha's, within the Buddha Dharma, in Buddha Dharma, being able to see dependent origination, someone who sees dependent origination. There is a saying, there's a quote from the sutra, Kangi Tenji Jawa Chunga Tonga Tini Chö Tonga, Kangi Chö Tonga Tini. So it goes like, the one that sees dependent origination has seen the Dharma, and the one that has seen the Dharma is liberated or will be liberated. So Dharma here has to be the truth. Dharma not in the sense of Buddha's teaching, but I think I said that last week. Dharma has 10 different, at least 10 different, 10 variant meanings, connotations. So all of them sort of entails around holding, and so holding something. When you say Buddha's teaching is Dharma, it means the Buddha's teaching holds the person who practices or follows the Buddha's teaching from falling into the pit of lower realm and so on and so forth, falling into the pit of negative actions, and by doing so into the pit of hell realm or the lower realms. And so in this case, those who sees dependent origination sees. The one who sees dependent origination, the one who sees dependent origination has seen the truth. The truth here implies to, the one who sees interdependence, the one who sees interdependence, or the one who sees dependent origination has seen the Dharma. That is the exact word. The one who has seen the dependent origination has seen the Dharma. So here, the Dharma here applies to the truth. So the truth here is the emptiness, that the ultimate truth of all phenomena is that they are all the ultimate truth of all phenomena, any phenomena, is that they are empty of having an inherent existence. So what it actually implies is that those who see interdependence has those who sees interdependence those who sees dependent origination sees emptiness, and those who sees dependent origin, those who sees the dharma, those who sees the dependent origination sees the dharma or emptiness. So, which also implies, so this will go a little bit, we will go a little bit philosophical. So, this is in the case of Prasangika Madhyamika, or in general Madhyamika as well. So, this quote will be used by the Madhyamika to state that in order to see, in order to realize dependent origination, one has to realize emptiness. Realization of emptiness precedes realization of dependent origination. We discussed that last week. There, in different schools of Buddhism, the Vaibhashiks, the Sautantrikas, the Chitamatrins, and the Madhyamikas, they all assess that they believe in the no self, emptiness, the four seals of the Buddha, right? All phenomena are all disintegrated, all integrated phenomena are impermanent. So the four seals, I can. So the four seals, and one of the four seals is that all phenomena are empty. All phenomena have the inherent. All phenomena are empty and selfless. And so in that case, in that sense, all the Buddhist philosophers or the Buddhist philosophical schools assert that they believe in they assert that all phenomena are empty. But within each school, the description, the meaning of emptiness, the empty which they profess, it varies differently from each of these schools. Anyway, so we will not go too deep into that. So here it says, so here it says, those who, therefore in your teaching, seeing dependent origination is hailed, that too not as an utter non-existence and nor as an intrinsic existence. So these two are known as the two extremes, utter non-existence, which is sort of a nihilistic approach, and then nor as an intrinsic existent one, which is the extreme of the existence and extremity of the existence and the extremities of the non-existent. So the Buddha's teaching, therefore, lies in the middle, in perfect balance, not falling in the upper extreme, neither falling in the upper extreme, nor falling in the lower extreme. So therefore, the Buddha's teaching, the Buddha Dharma, being in the center, being in the very center, in balance, and so at the core. And then therefore that this also can be used by the Madhyamikas. This is also used by the Madhyamikas to assert that the Buddha's actual or own view is that of the Madhyamika, which means the centralist, the centrist, the middle way. So this line actually tells us that the Buddha's view, or the Buddha Dharma, the Buddha's teaching, is free from those two extremes, the extremes of non-existence, utter non-existence, or extremity of the intrinsically existing phenomena. So okay. So the second and third line the first two lines of the verse number 13 is by itself, and the following that, the last two lines of the verse number 13 as well as the verse number 14 are actually the description or explanation of the first two verses of verse number 13. So why or how seeing dependent origination is hailed in the Buddha's teaching? Buddha's teaching is hailed. The reason is because it is not utter non-existent, or intrinsically existent. So the first, two similes are used here. Two examples are used. For the utter non-existent phenomena, the example used is the non-contingent is like the sky flower, a flower blooming in the sky. So a flower usually needs soil and it needs to grow. So a flower growing from utter space, so that is impossible. So that is a non-existent, that is an utter non-existent phenomena. And so therefore, the non-contingent is like a sky flower. If something is not dependent upon any other factor, then that phenomena is non-existent, just like a sky flower. Therefore, so now we will go to the second line of verse number 14. The non-contingent is like a sky flower. So therefore, all phenomena must depend upon another factor. Hence, there is nothing that is not dependent, because all phenomena should be dependent upon another factor to be validated or to be created or to be caused or to be sourced. Because of that, this arises. Without that, this will never rise. So therefore, hence there is nothing that is not dependent. If there is a thing that is not dependent upon anything, then that thing is nothing. So now the follow-up is that so if you are to assert, so if you are to argue with the Buddha saying that those phenomena that are existent, things, so here your word used was things existing through their essence, right? So we are going through verse number the line 3, third line of verse number 14. If things exist through essence, if things exist through their essence, their dependence on. So verse number the third line of verse number 14 here. So essence in so the word essence, which is Tibetan for Rangshin or Ngo. So Ngo, Rangshin, Dagni, that, so they are all synonyms. They all mean the same thing, and in essence, inherently, intrinsically, so they all mean the same thing. So in their essence, so in other words, if things exist through their intrinsic nature, if things exist through their intrinsic nature, their dependence on cause and conditions would be a contradiction. If things are existing on their own sort of self-reliant sort of essence, if they are existing on their own, then if they can exist on, if they are existing on their own, if things, that means they are, if things can exist on their own, exist at the moment, right? To exist is at this moment. If things can exist on their own, that means that thing could be brought into existence on its own, meaning it can be caused by itself. If it can be caused by itself, then it would not need any causes, any causes and conditions to create or generate or make it into existence. For you know what I mean here. So if, for example, if a person, the life of a person, a living person, a living is a present tense, right? So a living. So the living of a person is dependent upon itself. The life is dependent upon itself. The living itself, this very moment, is dependent. If it's a self-dependent, meaning it's independent, it's not dependent upon any other factors. If it can exist on itself, on its own self existence, if it can exist on its own, then it would not need any other factor, phenomena, to create it as well. Otherwise, how are you going to assert that things can exist on its own? Even within this very moment, when things are existing momentarily, in the present tense, when things are existing, they are existing per causes and conditions. If things are existing due to the causes and conditions, even in the present moment, when they are actually existent, then of course, in order to make them come into creation or into existence, which is before, which actually precedes their existence, they would of course need something to create them. You're getting me here? Let me just repeat it, right? So if something that is existing momentarily at this present moment, if something that is existing at this very moment needs other factors to be existent, to be in existence, even when they are actually in existence, if they need something, if they need to depend upon something else, we need to, right? We need, for our life to sustain, we need a lot of things. We need water, we need air, we need so many things for our life to be alive. Without all those phenomena, or without all those different factors, our life would not be alive. And when life ceases to become alive, then life is no longer life, right? So even during its own present existing moment, a phenomena is dependent upon other factors, then of course, preceding its own existence, they would need a phenomena, would need some other phenomena to push it into existence. So therefore, one can never put aside the possibility of a sort of a causal factor. One can never push away the possibility of a causal factor for something to come into creation, something to come into existence. So therefore, we can establish that all phenomena that are existing are dependent upon some other phenomena. If things are dependent upon other phenomena, then they are no longer independent, they are interdependent, they are dependent upon other factors. If you are going to assert, or if you are going to argue with the Buddha saying that things can exist on its own, things can be on their own, things can be by themselves. So that is like saying life can exist on its own without depending upon anything else, right? A thing can exist on its own without depending upon anything else. So we don't have to use life. So one might say, okay, you are playing with words here. So let's use a example, a lifeless, inanimate object like a stone. For a stone to be a stone, it is also dependent upon other factors. A stone is dependent upon the fact that it is not being crushed by a hammer at this very moment to be a stone. In order for the stone to stay as a stone, it needs the space or emptiness given by the hammer of not crushing it into pieces. Only then will the stone stay as a stone. Well, you might also argue that a crushed stone is still a stone. In that case, we can talk about disintegrating the stone into tiny particles, into atoms and molecules and so on and so forth, where it can no longer be designated as a stone. So for a stone to stay, an inanimate object as a stone, to stay as a stone, it is dependent upon other animate or inanimate objects to not destroy the stone, so that the stone can stay in the intactness of being a stone. So therefore, everything is dependent upon another factor. So another argument is that if things exist through their essence, right? So I just put an argument here. So another argument is that if things can exist but on its own, let's say, I lost the argument that I just put here. So if things are dependent, things are independent, things can exist on its own, things are not dependent upon other factors to exist, then if things can exist on its own without depending upon others, then things can come into creation without depending upon others as well. If that is so, then if things can come into creation without being dependent upon a causal factor, then things should be either perennially existent, forever, eternally existent, because they are no longer dependent upon a cause and condition to be existent. If you do not need, if you have a long, it's maybe a very stupid example. If you have a long, if you have an unending, if you have a bottomless pit of bottomless pit is not the right word. If you have a bottomless bag of gold coins, then you can use this for it. You can use that forever, because it's no longer going to be empty. Similarly, if the cause and if a phenomena is no longer dependent upon a cause and condition, if a phenomena is no longer dependent upon causal factor to come into creation, to come into existence, this is the second step, right? The first step is the assertion was that things are not interdependent, things are self-dependent, things are independent, things are existing through their own essence. If that is so, then things can also, if things do not need any other factors to validate them as existent phenomena, then they do not need any other causal factors to propel them into existence as well. And if that is the case, then things, let's use a stone. Stone can exist forever, eternally. If you are to argue that stone is existing through its own essence, it is not dependent upon any other factor to exist. The stone is existing on its own by itself. Then the creation of the stone, existence of the stone, can also be made by the stone. And if that is the case, then the stone will forever, eternally be a stone. Since that is not the case, cause and conditions for their things depending upon cause and conditions to come into creation and things existing through its own essence, things coming into creation with causes and conditions, but is existing through its own essence, meaning independently, things coming into creation interdependently, things existing independently, that is a contradiction. If you can exist independently, then you can come into creation, you can come into existence, you can become. If you can be independent, then you can become independent as well. And if you have become independent, if you have come into existence by being independent, if you come into existence by being independent, then you are dependent upon the fact that you come into existence by being independent. So even if you are, so the argument goes like that. Anyway, so we will go to the next chapter. So yeah, they're all related here. So if things exist through their essence, their dependence on cause and conditions for their existence is a contradiction. So that is the that sums up the chapter number 14. So therefore, since no phenomena can exist other than through origination of other than origination through dependence, no phenomena exist other than being devoid of intrinsic existence, you're taught. So that sums up the explanation of verse number 13's first two lines. This is the explanation, sort of a commentary, sub-commentary of verse number 13's first two lines. So the verse number 14 and 15 are actually, one is put in the sort of a orderly manner, and the other one is put in the reverse manner. So if things exist through their essence, their dependence on cause and conditions for their existence contradiction. So that is sort of like from A to Z. Now we go from Z to A. That is, therefore, since no phenomena exists other than through dependent origination, no phenomena exists other than being devoid of intrinsic existence. So that sums up. That sums it up, I think, pretty clearly. Now we are going into more detail here. Now, if things are, because intrinsic, so verse number 16, because intrinsic nature cannot be negated, if phenomena possess some intrinsic nature, nirvana would become impossible and elaborations could not be seized. So elaboration here implies to elaboration of grasping of inherent existence. So let's just call them ignorance for now, or unseeing, marikpa, unseeing, avidya, marikpa. So elaboration here is refers to avidya, marikpa, or unseeing or ignorance of unseeing the reality of all phenomena, which is negation of inherent existence. So here, how is nirvana impossible if phenomena have some intrinsic nature? So what happens is, so the argument here is that things are not totally intrinsically existent, but they have some intrinsic nature within it, and so therefore that intrinsic nature within. So this is an argument put by the others. Okay, other meaning so non-Buddhist. So the argument here is that you are right. We are dependent upon this and this and this and that. So nothing is totally independent. likewise, nothing is totally interdependent. There is something within the phenomena. Let's use something like a stone. There's something within the stone. Even the stone by itself, the stone as a whole is not independent, but there is something within, inside this stone. There is something in the stone that is intrinsically existent. And that intrinsically existent force propels the existence or sustenance of stone to be a stone, a stone to stay as a stone, a stone to maintain its stonelessness. So that is the argument. So the reversal, the response given is that if there's something, right, something. So you see the word here, yeah. On the second line of verse number 16, there's a sum here. If phenomena possess some intrinsic nature, right? If there is something within a phenomena, let's say a stone, that is its intrinsic nature. Okay, here we cannot use stone there because it would have to relate to the nirvana. So let's say the mind, right? Okay, I think stone is a good example. We use the stone as an example first, and then we will apply it to the mind, which is the actual message here, which is the actual teaching here. So if there is stone as a whole is not intrinsically existent, but there is something within the stone that is intrinsically existent. And because of that, everything is possible. Because of that, the stone stays as a stone. Again, if there is something within the stone that is intrinsically existent, which is making the stone stay as a stone, then the stone should stay as a stone forever. Because the force within the stone that is maintaining or sustaining the stonelessness of the stone is actually intrinsically existent, is inherently there, is essentially there, is naturally there. So a stone can never be unstoned. A table can never be untabled. A phone, a mobile phone, can never be unmobiled or destroyed, destructed. A negative mind can never be unstained. A negative mind can never be destructed of its negativeness. And the negative mind will always stay as a negative mind. And if the negativeness within the mind, let's say the negativity within the afflictive mind stays intrinsically, as long as we are unable to clean that stain, then there is no hope for enlightenment. So there is no hope for nirvana. So that is the argument. Since most of the since all the philosophers of the day during Buddha's time were also spiritualists, so therefore they they are seeking a truth with a purpose. So it's not just to understand the truth of all phenomena, but to realize the truth. So in Buddhism, we talk about, Buddhism also we talk about Chi Lam Nam Sum, the base, the path, and the fruit. So even though even though the term was, even though the non-Buddhist may not use the same terms, there is a similar belief within all the spiritual system. So there is a base, there's a basis, there's certain truth, there's certain belief, and then there's certain practices, which is the path. And the paths or the practices which is based on those basis, the shi, the ground, the path, which is a practice that is based on the basis, which is the truth. When one does that, when one perseveres in that practice of applying the teaching taught by, their respective schools, philosophies, then one reaches the fruition stage. One reaches the fruit. One reaches the destination of the fruition stage. So that is always there. So even the non-Buddhist, they also believe in a certain truth, the basis, and then they also believe in based on those truths, based on those fundamentals, so based on those bases, as we call them, those grounds. Based on those grounds, there are certain practices, and by doing certain practices, one reaches nirvana, or one attains moksha, meaning one attains sort of a attainment or deliverance. And so this is the argument given back. So if things are inherently existent, if there is some part of inherent existence within our mind, then that will always create. If let's use the example of a negative mind. Let's use anger. So if anger has an inherent, if anger possesses some intrinsic nature, so we will go with the second line of verse number 16. If phenomena such as anger possess some nature of intrinsicness, if a phenomena such as anger possess some intrinsic nature, then that intrinsic nature of anger will propel anger to maintain its negativeness, the abhorring others, abhorring people that you are not, people or activities or events that you are not, that you dislike, and this will always continue because it's intrinsically existent phenomena, and then the anger will never be unstained of its negative aspect. So we never say negative nature in Buddhism. We say negative. We use that in different terms when we say, to say a person of kind nature, or we would say something like that. A person of kind nature, a person of unkind nature. We will use those terms, but it is when we are using those terms lightly. So we are not saying that a person is unkind, has an unkind nature. A person is of an unkind nature intrinsically. We're not saying that. So if a person has some kind of unkind intrinsic nature, then that unkindness of the person, of the anger of the person, will never cease, will always be there, because it's intrinsically existing. So because of that, nirvana would not be possible. So since all the spiritualists, all the philosophers that is actually asserting those arguments towards, assaulting those arguments toward the Buddha, are also spiritualists. So the response was that if that is so, then there is no chance. There is no chance for liberation. There's no opportunity. There's no chance for liberation or nirvana for you guys, because it's intrinsically existent. So, and the liberation could not be seized, you're taught. So that is verse number 16. So now we made those clear, right? So this is the argument put forth by the non-Buddhist. Since we cleared that argument, So then comes the verse number 17. Therefore, who could challenge you? You who proclaim with lion's roar in the assembly of learned ones repeatedly that everything is utterly free of intrinsic nature. So this you can call like some sort of a elaboration from Tsongkapa's point. Well, not really an elaboration, but more like a okay. So this is an elaboration to the verse number 16. So I'm not, nothing much to explain here. So if I have to go, usually if we have time, if time allows, we can talk about, this is where we talk about the extensive features of Buddha's voice or the speech, in which it can never be toppled by others. So this is the, it's the lion's roar, the lion being the king of the animal kingdom, lion being the head of the animal kingdom. So when the lion roars, everyone's, all the animals stay silent, and it can, nobody can kind of like challenge that roar. So Buddha's teaching, the Buddha's speech is always the Buddha's teaching, the Buddha's speech were always referred to as the lion's roar, because it's unparalleled, unchallengeable, so to speak. So, okay, we have some time. So now, so this is somewhat saying why Lama Tsongkapa praises Buddha in this particular way. So that there is no so I'm reading from verse number 18, that there is no intrinsic existence at all, and that all functions as this arising in dependence on that. This arises because of that, right? What need is there to say that these two converge without conflict? So maybe for us, it kind of like sits quite well, because we talked about it for some time. But if someone is new to all of this, especially when Buddha first preached the emptiness based on dependent origination, it never sits well. And because of that, there are the four schools. The two lower schools were always saying that because there is no, because the things are dependent upon others, they are empty. Because things are dependent upon others, they are not empty. They are not empty of inherent existence. Anyway, so when one understands the preceding verses, then one can finally see that these two, that there is no intrinsic existence at all, and that all functions as this arising in dependence on that actually does converge without conflict. Prior to understanding, without proper understanding of the preceding verses, then it will be difficult to see those two kind of ideas to converge without any conflict. So this is another. It is through the reason. It is through the reason of dependent origination that one does not lean towards an extreme. That you have declared this excellently is the reason, O Savior, of you being an unexcellent speaker. This is very important, very, very important. In Tibetan, we use the word, ten del. Ten means depend. Del means to be connected or to be related. So one, so when one uses the first word, so there are two words for dependent origination in Tibetan, similar to English, dependent origination. So in Tibetan, we use ten, which means to depend, and del, which means to connect or to connect or to relate. The first word is ten, which means to depend. Because something is depending, it shows that they are not independent. If something is dependent, then it is no independent. If something is dependent, then it is interdependent. It is dependent upon something else, which makes it dependent. So therefore, it is no independent. This actually clears what we call, okay. Then the second line is del, which means connected. Sometimes we say den del, sometimes we say den jung. Jung is to arise, dependently arising, or dependently connected, or dependently related. So when one says dependent, when one utters the word dependent, we hear, oh, it is not independent, meaning it is free from independence, meaning it's empty of having independence, or it is empty of having an inherent existence. Because inherent existence constitutes interdependency. If something is existing inherently, then it is no longer dependent on other factors to exist. So something, since something is dependent, the word dependent implies that it is no longer independent, that it is no longer independent, and that it is empty of having an inherent existence. The first one. Then when you say then, the first word is then, right? Second word is del, or sometimes we say del meaning connected, related, or we say jung meaning arise. When we say arise, we know that first we use empty, right? Empty of, when something is dependent, then they are empty of having an inherent existence. Oh, things are empty. Empty, nothing there. Oh no, no nirvana, nothing. What's the point of practice? Nothing. Wait, there is a second word which says arise. There is nothing, but at the same time, something is arising. So there is nothing in the sense of inherent existence, but there is everything in the sense of dependently originating. So nothing and everything are summarized in two very succinct words, den and del. Den del or den jung. So that it is a very profound word. So we talk about this can be a topic of conversation for the Q&A later. We talk about the different kind of we talk about different reasoning logics used to repudiate to repel the arguments put forth by non-Buddhists regarding inherent existence. So there are many, the dependent origination being the king of reasoning. So there are many different reasonings. The reason it is called the king of king of all reasoning to disapprove inherent existence is the fact that all the other reasonings, when they're applied, clears one doubt and leaves another one. So there are two doubts, or there are two doubts, there are two densities, which is the extreme, we are referring to the extremities here, the extremity of utter non-existent, utter nonsense, or utter non-existent, nothing, real nothingness. And then the utter existence, utter non-existence and utter existence, or extremity of existence and extremity of non-existence. Things are inherently existent. That is, things are ultimately existent, meaning when we say ultimately, even though ultimately can have different meanings, but for us sentient beings, for us ordinary beings, when we form the word ultimate equals to inherent in our mind, to our unpurified mind, impure mind. So that's why we say there's no ultimate existent. That there's no, so ultimately or inherently existing, things existing inherently, that is one extreme. Things not existing at all, nothing, utter nonsense or utter nothingness, that is another extremity. So let's use the example of cause and conditions, right? Karma is total nonsense. Karma is utter non-existence. That is one extreme. Karma is existent. It is not only existent, but it is existing inherently. It has an intrinsic nature of its own to exist. So in both cases, in both arguments, in both assertions, they are falling in the pits of two extremities, two extremes. utter non-existence and extreme utter non-existent and utter existence. So both are to be dispelled. And this is perfectly done by the two words ten and del, or ten and jung, dependent origination, dependent relation, dependent connection. When we say ten del, or dependent origination, when we say den jung, dependent arising, when we say den del. So therefore, the dependent origination, the logic of dependent origination is crowned as the king of all logics. And the others were kind of seen as ministers or so on and so forth. Anyway, so here I will, so this is the reason, O Savior, of you being an excellent speaker. So I will stop here. I will conclude today's talk here and open for Q&A.
I'm sorry, your last example of karma being existent and non-existent, I didn't quite understand. Could you repeat?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, please? I can't hear you clearly.
Your last statement about karma being existent, when we set up the argument being non-existent, I didn't quite understand. Could you elaborate?
Sure. Sure. So, so I was referring to the two extremities, the extremities of utter existent and utter non-existent. So utter non-existent is that karma is a non-existent thing, meaning karma doesn't exist at all. There's no such thing as karma at all. If you say that, then that is one pit, because if you believe there's no karma, then there's no reaction. If you believe that karma is a non-existent thing, then you actually believe that there is no reaction to your actions, simply put. And that is one pit that you want to avoid. That is one pit or one extremity that you want to avoid. And the other extremity is that karma is utter existence. So we use that term in Tibetan, yubet pa, meaning an extremity of existence, utter existence, if you call it, for lack of a better word. So if it's utter existent phenomena, meaning the karma is existing intrinsically, inherently, then what happens is the same argument with stone, the example that we use with stone and other things. If the karma has an intrinsic nature to exist on itself, then the karma can never, let's see, so karma is either white, black, and there's a negative karma, positive karma, right? If it's a positive karma, then it will always remain as a positive karma. It can never be destroyed because it is intrinsically existing as a positive karma. If it's a negative karma, it can never be destroyed. It can never be destructed. The negativeness of a bad karma can never be deconstructed because it is existing. It is constructed intrinsically. It is constructed inherently. Therefore, it is essentially constructed. Therefore, it is essentially constructed negatively. Therefore, if you, it cannot be removed. It cannot be deconstructed because that is the very essence, that is the very nature, that is in the very essence of karma. So that is these are the two extremities, of utter existence and utter non-existence.
Thank you.
Rinpoche, you use the example of a stone which cannot be inherently existent because of the fact that a hammer can destroy it. And so that's an interesting thing. I'd never considered that dependency. But I'm thinking about something that we consider to be inherently existent, like space. So can we not say that space is existent dependence on something not filling it? So if you have a container that has space in it, you can put something into it and then that space no longer exists.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very good observation. That is exactly the reason why things. There are many other reasons, and this is one of the main reasons why a space is also not inherently existent, because it can be unspaced. It can be spaced out. If it is inherently space, if it is inherently existing, if it's inherently manifesting as a space, then it cannot be spaced out.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
Rinpoche, go ahead.
Hello.
Who wants to go first? So Rinpoche, I was just going to ask, these, kind of debates about, affirmation and negation, right? So something and nothing, right? And right, the idea that they're mutually exclusive, right? And so that helps the logic be, a little bit neater, right? So, but there are, when you get into like a debate about, something and nothing, right? So nothing in order to talk about it, or in order to have so that duality, right? So so you can argue that nothing is something, right? Because it's otherwise you couldn't talk about it,
right.
And you wouldn't have the concept of something, right? So
exactly, I get you.
So not to debate that, but to what extent do you, and maybe you can just help us, because these arguments at various times in history get, there's a purpose to them, right? Somebody's trying to prove something in order to, change or argue about law or argue about, whatever. So can you kind of, talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Yeah, as you said, it's a timeless sort of a debate or a topic, about, that's we talk about why evil exists, because without evil, there would nothing to be constituted as good. If everything is good, then there is, if everything is good, then one cannot establish it. It cannot be constituted as good, because good is comparatively established in relation to not good, in relation to so that is one argument, right? That is a timeless argument. So it's a the thing about nothingness here is a little different, I think. So we are not talking about nothingness, even though we use the term in English. We have for lack of better word, we have to use the term nothingness or nothing or nothingness, which is sort of I think is a noun. But I think in Tibetan also there is there's a huge sort of like a misconception that it is a noun, a meba or a meta. But I think actually I heard from some Sanskrit scholar, which the Buddhism actually came from, and especially the Nalanda tradition and the Madhyamika Buddhism all came from. They said that when we talk about shunyata, emptiness, and negation of phenomena and all these things, they are all words, and they are never nouns. So if it's a noun, then there is a positive side and negative side, right? There is a, you can say good and evil, white and black. So there's a clear cut thing. When it comes to nothingness, even though we use the term nothingness in English or meba in Tibetan, which is also a noun, but the Sanskrit term, even though nowadays people understood it to be a noun, it is actually the sort of the opposite side of existent, which is nothingness or non-existent or nothing, is actually understood in a verb, maybe a transient verb, and it's not as a noun. So this actually can, make an understanding in a sense of nothingness as not as a, two sides of one coin, but in a different realm, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah. So yeah, I do know what you mean. I mean, I have an idea. So, this is very unscientific, but at a certain point, the use of logic, it is not sufficient unto itself. I mean, it seems like you have to go outside, just like you're talking about space. So in order to talk about space and pinpoint, you have to talk about some sort of containment, right? You don't have to, but I mean, that's the way we talk about it, right? So how much does this have to do with wanting to have a complete system, and how much does what are the limits of logic here? Because in the Buddhist philosophy in general, right? And so so where do you see a departure from philosophy?
Okay.
Or do you?
So I think
from logic, I meant.
Right. So Buddhist logic, Buddhist rationality is based on its spiritual, essentially based on its spiritual practices. So therefore, all logic that is taught in the Buddha Dharma, even though it can have minimal, day-to-day worldly sort of applications, but it was principally meant to be used towards the ultimate goal of liberation, of ultimate goal of liberating oneself from negative emotions and the darkness of all the ignorance. And so that is how far one will not be. The Buddhist logic, the logicality of Buddhism will not be used for cynical purposes. And so when it becomes cynical, then one just leaves the topic, and one just leaves the discussion table, and then gets up. So one goes until one reaches it is always purpose oriented, goal oriented, and the goal being liberation. And so that is the limitation of Buddhist logic as well. As far as the purpose is served, the purpose of well, let's say cutting ties to untethering oneself from samsara or from the unenlightened state, untethering oneself from the unenlightened state. And whenever that purpose is fulfilled, then the logic is also no longer used. The logic is used only to serve that purpose. Yeah.
Good. All right. I have another question, but I'll wait till somebody else speaks.
Sure. Thank you.
Rinpoche, can you hear me?
Yes, clearly. Please go on.
Okay. I think many Westerners come into this as non-Buddhist deserters, where we think we love Buddha, we love the Four Noble Truths, but we didn't think we'd have to give up our predestination, our God. Yes, we knew from spirituality God was formless, but we like the idea of a predestined. If things don't work out, it was, everything happens for a reason. It's the karma that's driving. I don't really have to apply the antidotes, right? If I have a bigger construct of, say, a predestination or the one formless God. And I just think that's so humorous that you've been giving us, and so profound, you're giving us such authenticity to us to confront our misconceptions. And I want to go back to the trap of the self that we all fall into.
Sure.
The idea of the misconception of the truly existent self. And one of our, non-Buddhist deserters concepts that we love is the soul. Because we love that, in Western terms, the soul is our higher consciousness, is our higher self. I can engage in all sorts of negative karma and even my angers, but I have a soul that is going to save me, right? My salvation. Right. And the one thing I keep looking for correlation here as I dive deep, and I'm so grateful that I've been able to just be given the keys to just open this door that you provided us with these keys. But I hear over and over again past lives, and I'm very concerned about calling it my past lives, because then I feel like I am now falling into that trap of the truly existent self. So, but yet I hear so much, and, again, as, the non-Buddhist deserters that we tend to be, we love the idea of past lives, because we kind of love ourselves and we love our souls, and we don't want to abandon these traps. So can you speak to the Western concept of the soul and this idea of past lives, and how we should truly, if we are working towards selflessness, which I believe is just the core here, how do we reconcile those concepts?
Right. Yeah, that's a very profound question, and actually practice related. And so thank you for putting this out here. And so I will stumble upon the answer. So the thing is, so there is a saying. No, it's a quote from Buddha's teaching that there is. It's as a quote from Lama Tsongkapa's teaching from Lama Rinpoche, which says, "For ordinary beings, except for the realization, except for mindsets, except for mental factors that is a direct byproduct, except for mental factors and actions that are a direct byproduct of the realization of selflessness, every other mental factor or activities that we are involved as ordinary beings are actually, by and large, motivated by the idea of self." So this actually gives us a huge relief, saying, "Oh, okay, that's not just us, right? It's not just the Westerners, as you put it, or non-Buddhist deserters." So this is a dilemma faced by all ordinary beings. As much as we try, not to grasp at the existence of a self, not to grasp at the self-existing soul. This is something that we should all be working towards, but at the same time, this is something that we will always fumble upon. And so this is this is what I'm trying to say here is this is normal. So it's like you know, you have muscle X when you work out. So it's something like that. In the ordinary state of our in the ordinary state that we are in, this is something that we will always stumble upon. And okay, so the other thing is this. I think it's because of, we call this the conditioning, right? We have been conditioned for eons, for countless lifetime into, we have been conditioned, we have been familiarized, we have been conditioned into believing or thinking or seeing some sort of believing into there being a super conscious, what do you call that thing? Sort of a higher consciousness, you know, superbly powerful higher consciousness that is controlling everything. That is how we have been conditioned for so many eons, and because of so many lifetimes. Because of that, we have this tendency to believe, oh, there must be something, right? There must be something that is making this thing and like that. Or there must be something that is making the natural, you know, the so-called natural calamities, natural catastrophes. You know, we call them natural, but at the same time, I think there are actually someone is, you know, at play there. Someone is doing something. This is what we believe. We always need something to pinpoint. Whether it comes to, let's say, when it comes to within a family or in a workplace, and something is wrong, it is never one person. You know, it's never the whole sort of. Even if it's the fault of everyone, or I mean, everyone has equal flaws there, but you would have to find flaw in one person to pinpoint at, and looking for that one thing, looking for that the coreness, looking for that. That is, I think, that is within the human nature. So we will always keep on doing that until we reach a certain stage. And so there is, what I'm saying is, we should strive to get rid of that, but at the same time, as long as we are in this kind of state, in the state that we are, it'll be very hard for us to you know, let go of that. And then it is not something that we should be despairing. So, you know, you keep, so as the analogy that I used, as long as you keep doing your workout, then you will have muscle X. And that doesn't mean that, you know, what it actually means is you are, the muscle X is a sign that what you are doing is actually making an effect here. So when the more you practice, the more you try to unsee the soul, the more it will appear. And that is actually, it means that you are touching the nerve. And then we have to, once it all comes down to the deconstruction of inherent existence. And when you are able to destroy that, and if you remember the previous teaching of the mind training, we talk about the balloon filled with helium or just air. And so, yeah, so there is nothing of inherent existence there, you know, in a way. So even the balloon may be so big, there is nothing solid within the balloon to make it heavy, to make it stay, to weigh it down. So there is air, of course, you know, you can say air is a mass, but at the same time, you know, compared to other cruder form of mass, air is really, you know, nothing. So therefore, when you fill a balloon with mass, so the filling a balloon with mass is practicing yourself into emptiness. And when you fill your mind, which is the balloon, with the idea of non-existent of inherent, the negation of inherent existence, when you feel that negation of inherent existence is the air, So when you fill the balloon of your mind with the air of negation of inherent existence, then everything will start to deconstruct, crumble. And all those, so the self, the solidified form of self that you are so much seeing, you are so much afraid of, you are so much attached towards, you are so much, viscerally connected with, that will start to crumble, that will start to deconstruct, and then the balloon will fly away.
So does that mean that our past lives are merely illusions, or are they connected to our distorted concept of self?
They are connected to the distorted misconception of the self. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so include here today. Okay.
Are we still there?
I think he left and came back, so.
Oh, okay.
I think it's
Poor thing. Oh, he can go. Should we wave him goodbye? Thank you. It's past
Is there
1
another
o'clock.
session next week?
What?
Is there another session next week?
Yes, there is. Until the 20.
Sorry, I got disconnected or something, like lack of the weak signal. Did I finish my explanation, my answer, or not? Did I?
Yeah, we heard your answer, but it faded
Oh,
out.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
No, not
okay.
your fault.
Yeah, I don't know where I lost though. So was the answer sufficient, or?
Yes, I think it's so profound, because I keep hearing even in classic texts about past lives, but knowing that it's still connected to the distorted concept of self, that's
okay.
perfect.
Right.
Is exactly
Okay, that's
what
good.
I need to hear.
So,
So,
yeah, that's the end. Okay, that's the conclusion, concluding word I said. Okay, so you got it. So just dedicate for the benefit of all sentient beings, including ourselves, to be able to generate bodhicitta, as well as wisdom of realizing emptiness based on dependent origination. So that is the prayer. Now let's do the Mixima one time and then conclude. Mi me de ve de je me Lord, Zion, Shall I soul